Also someone who's made it his mission to reach out to people. By training, Richard Dawkins is a zoologist, but since the publication of his book, The Selfish Gene, 20 years ago, he's been in the forefront of those scientists who've made a public impact beyond the specialized world of the laboratory. He's combined his expertise with a gift for explaining it to a general audience, to stimulate and to excite them. His series of books on evolution have become bestsellers and have been translated into many languages. And last year, he was appointed the first holder of Oxford University's Charles Simonyi Chair of Public Understanding of Science. His views are controversial and challenging because of his insistence that we need look no further than science for an explanation of the great mysteries of life. The title of his lecture tonight is Science, Delusion, and the Appetite for Wonder. Would you please welcome Professor Richard Dawkins.
You could give Aristotle a tutorial, and you could thrill him to the core of his being. Aristotle was an encyclopedic polymath, an all-time intellect. Yet not only can you know more than him about the world, you also can have a deeper understanding of how everything works. Such is the privilege of living after Newton, Darwin, Einstein, Planck, Watson, Crick, and their colleagues. I'm not saying you're more intelligent than Aristotle or wiser. For all I know, Aristotle's the cleverest person who ever lived. That's not the point. The point is only that science is cumulative, and we live later. Aristotle had lots to say about astronomy, biology, and physics, but his views sound weirdly naive today. Not as soon as we move away from science, however. Aristotle could walk straight into a modern seminar on ethics, theology, political, moral philosophy, and contribute. But let him walk into a modern science class and he'd be a lost soul. Not because of the jargon, but because science advances cumulatively. Here's a tiny sample of the things you could tell Aristotle or any other Greek philosopher and surprise and enthrall them, not just with the facts themselves, but with how they hang together so elegantly. The Earth is not the center of the universe. It orbits the sun, which is just another star. There is no music of the spheres, but the chemical elements from which all matter is made arrange themselves cyclically in something like octaves. There are not 4 elements, but about 100. Earth, air, fire, and water are not among them. Living species are not isolated types with unchanging essences. Instead, over a timescale too long for humans to imagine, they split and diverge into new species, which go on diverging further and further. For the first half of geological time, our ancestors were all bacteria. Most creatures still are bacteria, and each one of our trillions of cells is a colony of bacteria. Aristotle was a distant cousin to a squid, a closer cousin to a monkey, a closer cousin still to an ape. Strictly speaking, Aristotle was an ape, an African ape, a closer cousin to a chimpanzee than a chimp is to an orangutan. The brain is not for cooling the blood. It's what you use to do your logic and your metaphysics. It's a 3-dimensional maze of 1 million nerve cells, each one drawn out like a wire to carry pulsed messages. If you laid all your brain cells end to end, they'd stretch round the world 25 times. There are about 4 million connections in the tiny brain of a chaffinch, proportionately more in ours. Now, if you're feeling like me, you'll have mixed feelings about that recitation. On the one hand, pride in what Aristotle's species now knows, and didn't then. On the other hand, an uneasy feeling of isn't it all a bit too complacent? What about our descendants? What will they be able to tell us? Well, for sure, the process of accumulation doesn't stop with us. 2,000 years hence, ordinary people who've read a couple of books will be in a position to give a tutorial to today's Aristotles, to Francis Crick, say, or Stephen Hawking. So does this mean that our view of the universe will turn out to be just as wrong? Let's keep a sense of proportion about this. Yes, there is much that we still don't know, but surely our belief that the Earth is round and not flat, that it orbits the sun, will never be superseded. That alone is enough to confound those who, endowed with a little philosophical learning, deny the very possibility of objective truth, those so-called relativists who see no reason to prefer scientific views over aboriginal myths about the world. Our belief that we share ancestors with chimpanzees and more distant ancestors with monkeys, that'll never be superseded, although details of timing may change. But many of our ideas are still best seen as theories or models, whose predictions so far have survived the test. Physicists disagree over whether they are condemned forever to dig for deeper mysteries, or whether physics itself will come to an end in a final theory of everything, a nirvana of knowledge. Meanwhile, there's so much that we don't yet understand. We should loudly proclaim those things that we do, so as to focus attention on problems that we should be working on. Far from being overconfident, many scientists believe that science advances only by disproof of its hypotheses. Konrad Lorenz said he hoped to disprove at least one of his own hypotheses every day before breakfast. Well, that was absurd, especially coming from that particular grand old man of the science of ethology. But it is true that scientists, more than others, impress their peers by admitting their mistakes. A formative influence on my own undergraduate life was the behavior of a respected elder statesman of our department when an American visitor had just publicly destroyed his own favorite pet theory. The old man strode to the front of the lecture theatre, shook the American warmly by the hand, and declared in ringing emotional tones, "My dear fellow, I wish to thank you. I have been wrong these 15 years. And we clapped our hands red. Can you imagine a government minister being cheered in the Commons for a similar admission? Resign, resign is a much more likely response. Yet there is hostility towards science, and not just from the green ink underlining brigade, but from published novelists and newspaper columnists. Newspaper columns are notoriously ephemeral, but their drip, drip, week after week or day after day repetition gives them influence and power, and we have to notice them. A peculiar feature of the British press is the regularity with which some of its leading columnists return to attack science, and not always from a vantage point of knowledge. A few weeks ago, Bernard Levin's effusion in the Times was entitled "God, Me, and Dr. Dawkins." And it had the subtitle, "Scientists don't know, and nor do I, but at least I know I don't know." Well, it's no mean task to plumb the full depths of what Mr. Bernard Levin does not know. But here's an illustration of the gusto with which he boasts of it. Despite their access to copious research funds, today's scientists have yet to prove that a quark is worth a bag of beans. The quarks are coming, the quarks are coming, run for your lives. Yes, I know I shouldn't jeer at science, noble science, which after all gave us mobile telephones, collapsible umbrellas and multi-striped toothpaste, but science really does ask for it. Now I must be serious. Can you eat quarks? Can you spread them on your bed when the cold weather comes? Well, it doesn't deserve a reply, but the distinguished Cambridge scientist Sir Alan Cottrell wrote a brief letter to the editor. "Sir, Mr. Bernard Levin asks, can you eat quarks? I estimate that he eats 500 million quarks a day. It's become almost a cliché to remark that nobody boasts of ignorance of literature, but it is socially acceptable to boast ignorance of science and proudly claim incompetence in mathematics. In Britain, that is. I believe the same is not true of our more successful economic competitors, Germany, the United States, and Japan. People certainly blame science for nuclear weapons and similar horrors. It's been said before, but it needs to be said again. If you want to do evil, science provides the most powerful weapons to do evil. But equally, if you want to do good, science puts into your hands the most powerful tools to do so. The trick is to want the right things, then science will provide you with the most effective methods of achieving them. An equally common accusation is that science goes beyond its remit. It's accused of a grasping takeover bid for territory that properly belongs to other disciplines, such as theology. On the other hand, you can't win. Listen to the novelist Fay Weldon's hymn of hate against the scientists in the Daily Telegraph. Don't expect us to like you. You promised us too much and failed to deliver. You never even tried to answer the questions we all asked when we were 6. Where did Aunt Maud go when she died? Where was she before she was born? And who cares about half a second after the Big Bang? What about half a second before? And what about crop circles? Well, more than some of my colleagues, I am perfectly happy to give a simple and direct answer to both those Aunt Maud questions, but I'd certainly be called arrogant and presumptuous, going beyond the limits of science. Then there's the view that science is dull and plodding, with rows of biros in its top pocket. Here's another newspaper columnist, A.A. Gill, writing on science this year in the Sunday Times. Science is constrained by experiment results and the tedious, plodding stepping stones of empiricism. What appears on television just is more exciting than what goes on in the back of it. That's art, lovey. Theatre, magic, fairy dust, imagination, lights, music, applause, my public. There are stars and there are stars, darling. Some are dull, repetitive squiggles on paper, and some are fabulous, witty, thought-provoking, incredibly popular. Those dull, repetitive squiggles are a reference to the discovery of pulsars in 1967 by Jocelyn Bell and Anthony Hewish. Jocelyn Bell Burnell had recounted on television the spine-tingling moment when, a young woman on the threshold of a career, she first knew she was in the presence of something hitherto unheard of in the universe. Not something new under the sun, a whole new kind of sun, which rotates so fast that instead of taking 24 hours like our planet, it takes a quarter of a second. Darling, how too plodding, how madly empirical, my dear. Could science just be too difficult for some people, and therefore seem threatening? Oddly enough, I wouldn't dare to make such a suggestion, but I'm happy to quote a distinguished literary scholar, John Carey, the present Merton Professor of English at Oxford. The annual hordes competing for places on arts courses in British universities and the trickle of science applicants testify to the abandonment of science among the young. Though most academics are wary